David Barr said, if the Act of Proscription and the Dress Act did not happen after 1746, how do you think things would be different today with kilts and Highland wear in general?
Okay.
Quick refresher for those who don't know, the Acts of Proscription were basically a series of laws which were imposed upon Scotland, specifically the Highlands, in an attempt to break the morale and the
spirit
and the tribal identity, I would call it, of the Highland clans, to take the wind out of the sails before another uprising happened.
Yeah. Basically take their strongest symbol, i.e. tartan, and the kilt, and then say, yeah, you can't do that anymore. If you want to do that, you have to join the British military.
Right.
So how would it have evolved differently? I would start by saying, okay, so the reason that they put the proscriptions in place was to quell, the spirit of the Highlander. So if they didn't do that, would the symbolism, would the spirit of the Highlander have persisted? So, point one, would there have been another uprising? Is the symbol of the kilt, is the symbology of the kilt strong enough? Inside joke.
Jerk.
Is the symbology of tartan, is the symbolism of the kilt strong enough and powerful enough for people to gather around and say, like, no, we're not done yet? Did that help stamp out the spirit? Would that kindling have relit? So that's a question. And if it did relight, would the Bonnie Prince have died a drunk in a foreign land? So what do you think? We'll start.
Or would he have tried again? Would he have?
Yeah, would he have tried again?
He specifically have tried again.
Yeah.
My sense is I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. But that's beside the point to the question in a way.
Let me add to it before we go too deep. I apologize. I'm going to cut you off in half a second because I realized I didn't say the other thing that was in my brain. So if proscriptions didn't happen and the Black Watch was not sent to watch over, and you didn't have to join the military, and there wasn't as much policing of the Highlands. Let's say they just said, okay, we really killed them at Culloden. We're done. Great. They're trounced. That's it. Us done. Job done. Go home. And the English left, and Scots that were on their side kind of dispersed, and then they kind of let the embers to rekindle. And there was less policing. And I'm going to add the policing to the Proscription Act.
Yeah.
Then would it have reignited?
This is different from this question a little bit, so I don't want to spend too much more time on the tangent, but I'm still going to say I think not, honestly, because I think I'm rusty on this stuff, but I'm going to say that my understanding is that the policing was not very consistent.
Correct.
Okay. There was definitely some policing, but I think it got pretty spotty pretty quick. I think the economics of the period trounce every other consideration. I think that basically people were, the culture was beaten down, but the economics of the Highlands were always kind of fragile anyway. I think they were more into a survival mode and also a seeking opportunity mode. So I think that now if we're talking like, it's not just the proscriptions, it's almost like if Culloden had never happened, because you have to have the impetus for them imposing a draconian measure like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I think that the economics of that time period would have prevented it from happening again. There was outside foreign support, which I think would have withered. I don't think that the Jacobites would have been able to rally the same kind of support abroad. And I think people were more interested in trying to look out for number one at that point. And you would have had fewer people transported, or you would have had the same number of people transported because that was not related to the proscriptions. But people would be looking for other opportunities.
When were the clearances?
That's 19th century.
Okay.
So late 18th through 19th century. It was a broad what was our earliest date, Adam, when we did the piece? Like 1780s?
Some stuff started in the late 1700s, but it
Yeah.
really didn't kick off till the early 1800s.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I'm going into the same other factors. So at the same time, the Brits were fighting Americans over here, so they depleted their army to send their army over here, their navy as well, over here to the U.S. So would that have been the opportunity potentially for if they weren't as weakened? Now, if the clearances were at the same time, then there's that issue. You're right, but if the clearances hadn't happened, then would they say like, okay, this is an opportunity because they're weak because their soldiers are over there as well, and kind of jumped in?
But a lot of the soldiers who did go to the colonies were, there was a significant number of Scots too.
That's the point.
So I mean,
So the ones that are on the English side
I don't know.
would have been out of the country. Maybe it was a chance for the Bonnie Prince to come back.
I doubt it.
Okay.
I think he shot his wad financially and in terms of personal charisma and personal power.
Yeah, by the end of
I
his
don't
life, 100%.
Yeah, certainly. I think even after Culloden, people's faith in him was mixed. So I don't know, kind of mid.
Yeah.
You know, here's my thing. I don't think that, and I know you talked about this. You thought about this aspect too, but I'm not sure we would have nearly the oomph behind the revival movement if the proscriptions had not been done, because the romanticism of the lost cause would still be there, but the proscriptions really put an extra layer of mystique and, you know, nobility against tragedy kind of a vibe into it.
Underdog vibe.
The underdog vibe. You wouldn't have the same springback boomerang effect that allowed like the London Society and the peers of Sir Walter Scott and then Sir Walter Scott himself to say, we need to reclaim this. It'd be more like,
yeah, if it wasn't unclaimed, it wouldn't need to be reclaimed.
Right. So it'd be a harder pitch for them, and therefore, I wonder it could almost have impacted the entire Scottish nationalism movement of the time.
I'll go a step further. The Tartans weren't, back in the 1700s, weren't necessarily clan Tartans.
Right.
And the whole thing with the King's visit in 1822, Sir Walter Scott, and reclaiming what it was when the King announced his visit, all the clan chiefs at the time were like, oh, shoot, we got to go get our clan Tartan to wear our clan regalia to this big event. So they went to all the different mills, including Wilson's Bannockburn, and said, what do I get? I'm, McAlpin. What tartan should I wear? Or, insert name here. So without that, if that never was a thing, then we may not have the particular clan tartans that were officially worn, adopted, whatever it was, in the 1820s. So if they weren't outlawed, it may have evolved differently. It may have just continued to evolve as a district area fashion kind of thing. Clan tartans themselves may not exist. It may have just been, hey, that's a cool pattern. I'm going to get that one for my kilt. And maybe I'll buy it for the household. So there may be some ways it could have evolved into that eventually. Or it may have just been, nah, I just like these 4 patterns. That's what my family members are going to wear. Or my servants will wear this, or the people of the village will wear that, or this is the local mill, therefore these are your options. So it may have evolved much slower because you didn't have that moment in time catalyst of Sir Walter Scott and the King's visit. Would the King have even visited, and would that whole thing become a thing? No, I don't think it was, again, to your point, because it doesn't have the same underdog story. It doesn't have the same thumbing your nose at the government and saying, well, I'm going to do a thing, and now I want to have the way my great-grandfather wore the thing or whatever, because if it wasn't made illegal, if it wasn't, outlawed, then it would have just evolved differently.
I agree. What George would have still visited because his reasons for visiting Scotland were to bolster the legitimacy of his reign. He was wildly unpopular, and going to Scotland was a huge, huge PR move. So he would have gone, but you wouldn't have had the same. Would you have had him dressing up in Highland dress and all that kind of stuff? Maybe not.
Wasn't it also the others in the government basically saying, hey, go up there kind of as a distraction to get him out so they could do more stuff?
Yeah. Yep, he was a bit of a stone in their shoe. And
Pebble.
I don't blame him. He was kind of a jerk.
But those flesh-colored tights he wore.
So, I mean, I think that the military would have still had an influence on Highland dress, but I don't know that Highland dress would have had you wouldn't have kickstarted the whole romantic movement the same way. Waverley and Rob Roy might have still been written, so the romantic movement may have still gone on, but I don't know if the clan thing would have. It's really hard to predict. I think there's so many variables other than that.
If it's not outlawed, do people care about it as much?
Exactly.
If I'm told I can't do a thing, that's the thing I'm going to do. Tell me I can't do something, and I'm all in. Now, it's kind of the same concept. It's if it never was outlawed, if you could always wear a thing, I'm going to throw an even bigger question out there. Would tartan even exist at this point as a symbol of Scotland? As a symbol of Scotland. I think it would exist because it's a technology that people do. Plaid shirts grunge would have still happened without flannel shirts. But would tartan exist and have the same meaning imbued in it as it does now without all that?
I think that's the real question, is like how much did you need that
Spark.
part of the tragedy to get the Romantics going and then the Victorians? Because, I mean, Highland wear is what it is because people decided to make it hugely complicated and more interesting than other countries' national dress. I think you could say that maybe if we didn't have the impetus for Victoria getting psyched about it and stuff, then Scottish national dress would kind of occupy the same space as other countries' national dress, where like you see it at events, folk dance events or whatever, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, but would the tragedy of Culloden and the loss of the rebellion been enough to spur the Romanticism, or how critical were the proscriptions to that mindset, I think is the question. I think it would definitely tipped the scale way in favor of it happening, but how much it did, I'm not completely sure.
Yeah.
I think our ideas are quite plausible.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Here's the bigger question. Would we exist as a company? Would this show exist?
Well, we'd sell lederhosen.
Would you be seeing us right now? We're just a figment of your imagination. What if it never happened? Ian, has there been any interesting comments?
How many people are
freaking
saying
blown.
we're full of shit?
Boy, I was not ready for that. Nobody said you were full of shit.
Oh, fair enough. Not yet.
So Marcel Gomez had an interesting comment here, and I think I potentially agree with him a little bit. He says he thinks kilts would have been less relevant in the lowlands, Orkney, Shetland. Tartan would have been less national and more regional.
Yes. Yes.
That
100%.
was the Sir Walter Scott effect that my favorite history presenter,
Neil Oliver.
insert the name after it,
Neil Oliver
pointed out about 1822 is that we were all Highlanders now after 1822.
Yep.
That's so absolutely right. Absolutely true.
The king didn't visit the Highlands. He visited Edinburgh.
Right.
So.
But everybody wanted to dress up and do the
Yep.
thing.
I want to be cool like the king and his flesh-colored tights. Insert second reference here. Ian,
What else?
any other thoughts or comments, or should we move on?
The thought that I had related to this, so if kilts never got banned and people had kept wearing them, at least to the degree that they had been prior, do you think there's a chance that it could have just fizzled at some point? Like young people looked at it as, oh, that's that fogey old thing my grandpa wears.
That's what we're arguing. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
And
that,
then I think at some point it would have come up that people wanted to, found this interesting thing from the past and want to revive it. But if the industry isn't there, what do you do?
I would argue that tartan would have persisted, and you'd still have tartan as an element of national dress, but in a more of just a folk wear kind of a way.
Yeah.
The kilt, the specific garment of the kilt, would be less popular, I think, because all the associations of the kilt with the Highland warrior, with the rustic lifestyle, with all that kind of stuff, would be less romanticized, perhaps, and therefore less important. But tartan, because it looks cool, you'd have an export business. I think you'd still have people who wanted, tartan patterns in their cloth, but it'd be more like suits and dresses, not kilts.
Do you think if there was an attempt to revive it now after, being out of the mindset for 100, 200 years, do you think that the cloth that people have available to them to try to revive the whole kilt thing would be the same? Would it be more homespun? Would it end up being something more acrylic potentially based on what's available today?
Depends
Just
on how much
because-
knowledge. If there's no thread of consistency across the whole thing,
this is what I'm getting
then,
at.
then the question is what gets handed down.
I guess it depends on what the tartan uses are that Eric's describing.
Yeah, exactly. It's the use. The cloth would follow the use. So if it's all
Yeah.
curtains, then it'll be lighter weight. If
Yeah.
it's all men's clothing, it'd be a certain weight. If it's all cheap and cheerful stuff, then it would be acrylic.
Yeah.
I think what it really, really boils down to is the underdog thing. People love an underdog story.
Yeah.
That is a universal fact. It's you always want the little guy to win. You always want the guy who has less of a chance. And without the underdog story of Culloden, period, and then also the Proscription, and also Scotland as a country being ruled over by the English, there's 100 different what ifs we could play on what if Scotland won at Culloden and the Proscriptions never happened.
Yeah.
Then would kilts still exist because people would care less about them because they're no longer an underdog? You could literally go 100 different ways with it. This is a very, very weirdly cerebral and interesting question. I'm very glad we got this one.
I feel a series of novels coming on.
Yes, the Marvel What If series, Highlandware edition. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That
Excellent.
was fun. Hey,
Yes,
Dave,
indeed.
thank you. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate
Cheers.
it. Hey, thank you for that question. That was a hell of a lot of fun. There's a whole industry of what if history novels out there, and I love delving into that kind of thing. So if you have an idea for a what if scenario regarding Celtic culture, Celtic history, fashion, any of that, tell us in the comments. I would love to have more of this stuff to chew on.